Greetings and blessings in Jesus' name. This is going to be the prayer and praise update for Mission 1521 for the month of September. Last month, you didn't get a live update from me, but we had a recorded second anniversary. Now that was full of all kinds of field reports and stories from the field and a little bit of projection, vision casting into this new season, this fall and winter season. And if you would like to get a hold of that or get the private link to that, because it did have some very sensitive information in it, you can always write me at matt@mission1521.com. And through that email, I will send you the link to be able to watch that whole second anniversary celebration. Well, we not only in the month of August did that anniversary celebration, but we also made a decision as a board to send out $5,000 of relief money down to the Mosquito Coast after a severe flood had hit that region. We were able to help out with some of the folks that were hardest hit. And we took a step of faith and wrote a fairly large check for us, and were able to bless a lot of folks with both food and some seed for the bean season coming up. Of course, if you at any time want to jump in with contributions, whether on a monthly basis or for special projects like that, or the one I'm going to tell you about next, we're always welcoming those gifts of partnership with us, and we truly appreciate them. Well, we are in a bit of a transition to a new season in this little ministry. We're very excited about raising the awareness right now, both in prayer and for resources, for this new time, this new season we're calling simply Gen 2. Well, the basic concept, of course, in the scriptures is that the elders of one spiritual generation would pass along the gospel and sound biblical doctrine, as well as an example of obedience to it all, onto the up-and-coming younger spiritual generation. Now, that's not always a chronological age. Sometimes it's a spiritual maturity issue. But there's always a process of the elders teaching the youngers. Now, we all learn from each other, and we mostly learn from Christ himself, but there is a general flow in the scriptures from those that are a little more seasoned in the principles of God and passing those along generously to those that are still learning the basics and getting established. Well, this concept is going to come into play as it relates to Mission 1521 in the coming months in some very specific ways. We're going to make some efforts, some concentrated efforts to invest in the upcoming generation, spiritually speaking. Now, this is, of course, a biblical concept, and we could mention lots of examples. Our key verse that we're using to just headline this season is 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2, which says, "And the things which you have heard from me," Paul is speaking here, "among many witnesses, commit these," and he's speaking to Timothy, "to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." So we see actually 4 spiritual generations represented in this verse, that Paul is passing along to his spiritual son Timothy the scriptures here that he was writing in these letters, the principles of leadership in 1st and 2nd Timothy. And Timothy was to take those principles and pass them along to other men, faithful men, mature men, elders, if you would, so that they could teach others also. Amazing how quickly time can fly, and how important it is to make the most of that time in committing the things which we have learned from God's Word on to that next generation. Now, we do that in families. We do that in the church. We do that sometimes in community. But we certainly do that as a ministry as well. Well, the other examples that we might possibly draw on, and there really are many, but from the Old Testament, we could point to how Moses was a discipler of Joshua, and how Joshua would go on to lead the nation of Israel. We could look at how Elijah passed the spiritual baton on to Elisha. We read about that in 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 2 and verses 1 through 14. It came to pass that when the Lord was ready to take Elijah up into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. Then Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, please, for the Lord has sent me on to Bethel." But Elijah said, "As the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you." There was a connection there. And he insisted on sticking close. Well, interestingly enough, the sons of the prophet in verse 3, they spoke up, coming over to Elisha, and they said, "Don't you know that the Lord will take away your master from over you today?" And he said to them, "Yes, I know, keep silent." Now, these sons of the prophets were a group of up-and-coming prophets, if you would. They were obviously still learning, demonstrating to some degree some immaturity here, maybe speaking out of turn. And this would happen actually another time, even after Elisha would see Elijah going up in the chariot of fire and picking up his mantle and crossing the Jordan there. Those same sons of the prophets would speak up later down in verse 15. It says, when the sons of the prophets who were from Jericho saw him, they said, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." Now again here, it's a bit of immaturity expressing itself. If you would, they had this astounding perception of the obvious. And they would even offer to send 50 strong men to go look for their master. They didn't realize that he had been taken up into heaven. That is Elijah. And so not only here, but in another coming story, in chapter 4, when there's poison in the pot, one of them had mistakenly added some ingredients that they had gathered in the wild into their stew, and Elisha has to correct that by pouring in meal or flour. And then you can go on and see also in chapter 6 of 2 Kings. And the sons of the prophets there, they said to Elisha, starting in verse 1, "See now, the place where we dwell with you is too small for us." So they had gotten together. Elisha was leading the sons of the prophets, and wherever they were at, it was getting a little tight. So they asked him, and they said, "Please, let's go to the Jordan and let every man take a beam from there, and let us make there a place where we may dwell." They needed to expand their facilities a little bit. So he answered, "Go." Then one said, "Please consent to go with your servants." And he answered, "I will go." So he went with them, and they came to the Jordan. They were cutting down the trees. One of the axe heads falls into the Jordan River, and the one that was felling with it said, "Alas, it was borrowed." The man of God, Elisha, says then in verse 6, "Cut off a stick and throw it in, and he made the iron float. Therefore he said, "Pick it up yourself." So he stretched out his hand and took it. Well, there's lots of wonderful spiritual implications for this story, but for today, I just want to point out that there is this ongoing relationship between the men of God, the established ministers of the gospel, and those that they are training up. And the fact that sometimes their numbers grow significantly, evidently over 50, and they needed more facility. Well, I'm so glad to be able to say that the ministry there that Pastor Ludi Washington is leading from Puerto Lempira in Honduras, the number of disciples he has continues to grow. Not just those that are listening over the airwaves, which are thousands upon thousands, but those he's able to meet with personally and face to face, gathering them at different times and different places, always tight for space, where he gathers them to teach them the scriptures, whole books at a time, principles of ministry, and going out and leading them in the ways of evangelizing whole communities. And Ludi has been doing this for decades now. We kind of showed him the ropes back in the 90s and the early 2000s, and he's continued to do this throughout the years. Now, some of the ministers are well established, but others are now up and coming. There's a whole new generation of young men wanting to study with Ludi, but his voice is beginning to fail. His eyes are beginning to fail. In fact, one of our prayer requests for this month is the cataract surgery he'll be getting later in September. But we're seeing the need to help this man of God have a facility that will be closer to home, where he can continue to pour into the next generation, Gen 2, so that they too can be well trained in the scriptures, the gospel, and the solid doctrine of the New Testament. Well, that's one specific way we want to implement Gen 2, is to help him build a pastor training facility. As you probably know, because of some generous gifts back at the beginning of the year, we've been able to purchase a piece of property, 93 meters squared. And the local congregation there with Ludi have been clearing it and preparing it for some construction. They're currently working on a bridge and bettering the road that gets in there and putting down gravel, so that this fall, well, that's coming up right these days, that columns can begin to be built. The structure is going to be about 30 foot by 60 feet, and we're already beginning to send some resources down so that the cement and rebar can be bought for those columns that need to go up in the coming months, and the surrounding top beam also of concrete, because we're planning on taking a construction team down in February. Right now, we're quietly recruiting some construction guys. By the way, if you're at all interested, if you have some good health and any ability in construction, please get a hold of me and talk with us about joining us for this February 9th through 21st construction team, going down to build both the trusses and to put on the roof for this first phase of the pastor training facility. Now, it's also going to be used as a church locally for the growing congregation and youth ministry there in Puerto Lempira that Ludi is also ahead of. But frequently, as he brings in the younger students, they'll be gathering there for a seminar, if you would, a training of the pastors. We're expecting it to cost around $15,000, And we really are hoping that people will come alongside of us and pray and obviously give toward that particular project. Now, this Gen 2 is going to express itself a little bit differently amongst the Garifunas. Pastor Eduardo is already training a group of young men in the church context there in La Ceiba, having them meet weekly, studying through the attributes of God as well as New Testament leadership practices. We will continue to support him with resources and in any other way that may be needed in the coming months. Now, with the Mayagnas, Pastor Cornelio is also gathering men into his home on a weekly basis. He has a fewer number of those, but they are eager to learn the scriptures. Of course, his widely heard radio broadcast is casting very broadly the teachings of scriptures, but there are those with questions that want to sit down with him in his home with no theological education, and we are praying toward those young men that will also be raised up amongst the Mayagnas. When we talk about the Fulani and the implementation of Gen 2, we're talking about increasing Pastor JB's ability to travel, along with Pastor JD, to get him out amongst the evangelists, amongst those leaders of underground churches, amongst the Fulani, and making sure that they have all the resources they need, both in terms of memory cards and tablets and personal time where questions can be asked and issues can be dialogued about and prayed over. So we're going to be investing in more travel time for Pastor JB. So do be praying with us. This fall and early winter season is going to be a time of gathering of the additional resources we're going to be needing. And then, as last year with Lift Up Weary Hands, as the new year comes around, 2023, we'll begin the implementation and the expansion of these different projects, seeing once again that younger generation come into the kind of maturity and ability so they can extend much further the influence of Jesus, glorifying his name amongst all the nations. Well, I hope that's understandable, and I hope that's encouraging, and I do hope that you'll find a way to join with us in one way or another. Well, let me mention some specific prayer requests. For Miskito Pastor Ludi, I would ask that you would be praying for his voice. He has had some real challenges. He's still a little hoarse at this point, but he is speaking again, and it does open the opportunity for others to teach along with him, but we do believe his time as a teacher is far from over. Pray for a complete healing to his voice. Also, he's coming up on a cataract surgery on the 22nd of September, thereabouts, and he'll be traveling for that into La Ceiba. Also pray that the transmission or the transfer of resources from the United States here down to that remote region will go smoothly. We've had some difficulties with that. They're in a season of purchasing resources initially, and many more resources to come. So pray that that whole process would go smooth so that all the materials and the prep is done by the time the team reaches there in February. For Pastor Eduardo, I want to thank the Lord that he's getting over another bout of a stomach ailment. Both he and his wife Denise battle from time to time an outburst or outbreak of that H. pylori bacteria in their stomachs, and had a bit of a battle with that last month, and pray for his complete healing if you would. Also, just his whole family, as there are health issues that tend to pop up from time to time. They're one of the primary ways the enemy seems to try to interfere or get in the way of the work that they all are doing in their church and their radio and internet broadcasts. Let's pray for Mayagna Pastor Cornelio, as he and his wife now have a new baby girl born just this week. I don't even think they've named her yet, as that custom there is to wait a while before they give their new girl a name. But mother and daughter are doing well. I'll try to include either on the Prayer and Praise update or perhaps on this video a picture of that sweet girl. So be praying that she grows up strong and their whole family continues in health. The Acts series in Mayagna is also being broadcast a second time while Cornelio works on the book of John. Also be praying that some of his editing software that's stopped working can be fixed in the near future, probably just some updates. So we're trying to find a time he can get out of the jungle and in for a little work on his computer. Be praying about that. Now for Pastor JB. We thank the Lord that now 2 Corinthians is finished recording, and it's time to do some more production in that. Pray also for his computer that's having some issues only with the software. And again, I'll be dealing with that even tomorrow, actually. So be praying about that. There is also an evangelist that he's worked with for years now in an eastern state that is regularly gathering Fulani people, actually, both believers and seekers, in nighttime meetings in remote places. And that group, actually multiple groups, are growing. They gathered some of them as well as some other Fulani believers recently and had over 50 of them that came together for teaching in the Word, teaching in evangelism, and the distribution of resources so they can carry on their own study of the New Testament in particular, wherever they may find themselves around the Nigerian countryside. Another praise, you've heard us ask for prayer for Gambo, a Hausa evangelist, and he had been recaptured, but by the grace of God has also been released now. Well, so many things to be praying about. Oh, and before I forget, we're still trying to get in around the capital of Nigeria with a new radio station. The one we were praying back in June and July for has not worked out, not as of yet, and now we're pursuing a new lead to get JB's programs on in that region. Well, thank you for taking the time to listen in, to consider what God is doing, not just at home, in our homes, in our communities, but around the world. This is a point of contact that we have with some dear brothers and sisters that are out there making great sacrifices for the unreached peoples that are working amongst. So continue to pray if you would, and give generously whenever possible, that we'll be able to support them in some of what I believe is to be some of the most cutting edge and, well, just for me, wonderful acts of service going on in the mission field to date. God is doing things all over, but I couldn't be more excited about the things He's doing through our partners. Well, may the Lord continue to bless you and encourage you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.